Hey everyone, it's Tim Holtz and I'm here at Sizzix headquarters. Now, did you know that there are several different ways that we can alter our already very cool 3D texture fades? Let me show you how. So, of course, a 3D texture fade is this really innovative embossing folder that has so much definition and texture to it. Now, I'm going to run one through and just kind of give you a recap on how we use these 3D texture fades. First thing, we're going to choose our substrate. Now, I'm working with 118-pound watercolor cardstock, so you can use all different variety and weights of cardstock, even thick stuff like this. Now this has a little bit of texture to it, but anytime I work with cardstock and a 3D folder, I want to mist both sides of that. That's just going to help kind of form that paper and really allow it to accept this new texture that we're going to give it with our 3D folder. So I'm just going to insert it in that, close it up, and we're going to run it through our machine. Now, when I run it through the machine, remember it's one cutting pad only, just one. So I'm going to place that on the top, and I'm going to run this through my Vagabond. Now, whether you're using the Vagabond or the Big Shot, just going to take that through. And for our 3D, we want to go through 3 times. 3D, 3 times. There we go. I'm going to go back. And you can really hear on the Vagabond, because it is a thicker folder, like it's really taking that pressure. So remember, one cutting pad. All right. So we're going to take this out. And let's take a look at this. Oh my gosh, love 3D. Look at that detail. Now we're going to alter this. So I want to share with you just a couple of tricks. Whenever I run something through my 3D embossing folders and I get that impression in there, because the paper is slightly damp, I want to dry it before I do any of the altering. So whether you're just going to let that air dry or you want to use a heat tool, but we want to make sure that our paper is dry before we add any ink to it. Otherwise, it's going to react a little weird. So I have one that is already dry over here. This is just, and you can kind of hear that, it's dry cardstock. And this is how I'm going to alter this. I'm going to use, of course, my favorite, ink. I'm going to take some Distress ink. I'm going to take just a couple of colors. So I'll take just these small little ink pads out of here. Just take a few colors. There we go. We'll do pink and green for this one. And I'm going to use a Distress blending brush. Now what I love about these brushes were really inspired for me to actually use ink with embossed designs. I know I love working with an ink blending tool. You may have seen other videos on that. But this one, these blending brushes are really designed with Sizzix in mind. Even though when you work with these, you can use them on flat papers as well as embossed. Wait till you see what it does to this. So I'm going to take a couple of brushes. Now I have a blending brush that is dedicated to different color families, so I just need one for my reds and pinks and one for my greens. And here's what I'm going to do. Start with just the green one. Now the blending brush, when we open it up, it's just going to expose this brush, kind of like a stencil brush. I'm going to take the lids off of my colors of ink. There we go. And I'm just going to take the brush, just load up some ink color on there, just like that. And then I'm going to go over this and watch what happens, all right? Just going to go kind of in my swishing motion and go over the areas that I want to color. And we want to build layers, so keep that in mind. But what's happening is this blending brush is just applying the perfect amount of ink. But instead of worrying about how much pressure I apply, right? If we were doing a blending tool or a brayer, you'd think, am I pushing too hard? Am I not pushing hard enough? The brush is doing all of the work. And because this is 3D, I'm going to pick up another color over here just because I like to add some different contrasting color. Because of the pressure of that 3D folder, look what's happening. You can see here that that paper, because it was stressed, right, and actually kind of embossed and created that texture, it's really porous. It actually broke the surface tension of the cardstock, and so that is more porous than my background. So that's really giving all of that great definition to my embossed design. So I'm just going to pull this up, close that brush, and we'll go into our other colors. This is what I love about working with all of the different collaboration of the brands using Ranger products with my Sizzix products. It's just match made in creative heaven, right? So here I'm just going to go in, just going to add some colors. Now remember, when we're using the blending brush, it's just applying a light amount of color. So you may not see much ink apply at first, but patience here, patience. Let's build our layers. So I'm just going with a little bit of Tattered Rose. Now I'm going to go in with a little bit brighter pink of Worn Lipstick and blend that out. Look at that. Look how that just pops. So cool, and we can even blend those colors in there. Take a look at that. Serious, great way that we can take our Distress ink and our blending brush and just add that definition to white embossed cardstock. But of course, there are other ways that we can alter. Let's talk about just another one of the 3D textures. And that next one, of course, is going to be Woodgrain. Now, I want to remind you, when it comes to working with these 3D folders, that following all of those tips about spraying the cardstock first, doing multiple passes, it really does make a difference. Here is a side-by-side comparison using the same cardstock. This is mixed media heavy stock. This one was just run through one time dry cardstock. And it took some texture, it sure did, because of course it's a 3D texture fade, but if you miss the paper, both sides, you run it through 3 times, look at the difference. Look at the detail that this cardstock takes because we've followed all of that, because that's really important when it comes to working with 3D. There's so much technology into creating those highs and lows that following those tips does make a difference. So how do we take paper like this and really make it look like realistic wood grain? Well, it's easier than you think. All you need to do is start by, of course, embossing your paper, then go in with your favorite ink. Now I chose to use some Distress Oxide, smeared a little bit on my mat, just did a watercolor wash, so you can use any ink, any color to create a base color. The trick on this one though, to really get that wood grain to pop, is working with a Distress Crayon. Okay? Distress Crayon is a pigment, so that's going to sit on top of the surface, and that's what's going to really give it this contrast. So what I do is I'll take the crayon, and I'll just kind of twist up some of that medium, just kind of twist up from the base, and I'm going to go directly over this surface. Okay? Now at first when I go over this, you're going to see that it just kind of skips over it, well, like a crayon, right? Because that's the whole thing about this. It almost has kind of that waxy look. But the cool thing about Distress crayons, they are reactive with water. So I'm going to take a little bit of water and just spray some on my media mat. Take my finger, go in there, and I'm just going to start just rubbing this out. And you'll see that just by adding a little bit of that water to that Distress crayon is getting that color to move, but using my finger, it's just allowing me to move that right over that top layer and really create that perfect wood grain look. How easy was that, right? So cool using that 3D texture fade of wood grain to create realistic wood. We can cut this up and use it on our favorite village houses, cards, anything. All right, it gets better. We can do so many different things. All right, next we're going to talk about going to a little bit of the industrial side here. So let me just clean up this water. And here we're going to go in and change ordinary metallic cardstock into something very vintage and very, very eclectic. Look at that. So this is just paper. This is the metallic craft stock from Ideology. Now, normally this is just the silver one. When I emboss it, it's going to give me that great texture, and this is that rivet 3D texture fade. So I love all those little rivets, and you can see those dents that are in there. That is part of the magic of these 3D texture fades. But take a look at this. Look at how much definition we get by really giving it that industrial vibe. Here's how easy it is. For this one, we're going to use some black distress paint and a blending tool. That's it. That's all we need. So what we're going to do is we'll take our paint, just going to shake it up. It's a fluid paint. I'm going to flip this off, and I'm just going to go in and put one little dot onto that sponge. Now, I have a dedicated sponge for this because distress paint never hardens, so I just use it on that same sponge, and I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to rub that paint right over the paper. It doesn't have to look pretty right now. Okay, and this is just that metallic paper. You can pounce that. If you have a really textured design, if you weren't using the rivet folder, maybe you had something like the gears that had a little bit more highs and lows. There's nothing wrong with going in and pouncing this. You're not going to do anything to that great texture. And I'm going to just let that paint sit for just a minute or so. I'm going to go in with a dry paper towel. That's it. And then I'm just going to go in and just start buffing this off. And look at how that alters that texture, because you're leaving some of that color, some of that paint in the highs and the low area. Take a look. How cool is that, right? A great way that we can alter our favorite 3D texture fades from Sizzix. So many possibilities.